Everyone thinks they know the world's top travel spots, but now people are turning away from one of the biggest. The United States, once the third most visited country, attracted millions to its cities, parks, and landmarks. Now visitor numbers are sinking and billions in revenue are gone. Why are people suddenly avoiding America? And what does it mean for the future of U.S. travel? On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we uncover the real reason why tourism in the U.S. is collapsing. In December 2024, experts were predicting U.S. tourism would surge by 9%. But just months later, the forecasts have flipped. America is now staring at an 8% plunge. The results are sending shockwaves throughout the industry. In 2024, the industry was riding high. Over 72 million international visitors packed into New York City, Miami, Los Angeles, and Disney World for the kids, before fleeing off to Las Vegas so the adults could drink the Magic Kingdom away. Now, the U.S. is the only country projected to see a decline in tourism revenue. That projected 9% increase would have added $16.3 billion to U.S. coffers. But now, it's looking at a loss of around $12.5 billion. An overall $28.5 billion lost revenue. And that is only if things don't get even worse. The biggest decreases have been from Canada, Western Europe, and Asia. Canadians really don't want to visit anymore. Inbound visits are down 25%. Considering the friendly, chilly country is right next door, that is not great. And Canadian tourists made up 25% of all foreign arrivals in 2024. But visits from Western Europe are also down 4.9%. And financially, it doesn't even make sense. The dollar is weak. Anyone coming in with euros can make it rain like an early 2000s rapper. At the end of December 2024, Europeans could get $1.04 for each euro. At the end of August 2025, they could get $1.17 per euro. That's a 12.5% increase, or 12.5% more I Heart NY t-shirts. Which means that if anything, tourism to the US should be going up, way up. But that's not what's happening. Let's start with why tourism from Canada is falling. It's an important factor in the overall decline of US tourism. Canadians are the biggest segment of foreign visitors to the US and have seen the biggest freefall. If you've been following the news, you might have noticed Canadians aren't too happy with the US at the moment. Experts blame, quote, sentiment headwinds. We call it Canada mad. They are still traveling, of course, but according to Hyatt CEO Mark Hoplamazian, they are skipping the US and heading straight to Mexico and Caribbean destinations. The entire US has literally become a flyover state for Canada. Between January and June, Mexico welcomed 1.68 million Canadian visitors, up nearly 12% from last year. Meanwhile, the US saw the opposite. Canadian air arrivals dropped 22.1%, and car arrivals fell 33.1%. An escalating tariff war between the US and Canada in the first part of 2025, coupled with Canada being asked to be the 51st state, the answer was no if you were curious, has Canadians fuming. And that is not a crowd you want to anger given that they grew up playing hockey in weather cold enough to stop your heart. So just how angry are Canadians? The Pew Research Center found that in July 2025, 64% of Canadians held an unfavorable view of the US, with nearly 40% saying very unfavorable. That is a 20% drop from the previous year. That is the lowest view Canadians have had of the US since Pew started the survey in 2002. And they don't just dislike their southern neighbor, they see them as an outright threat. 59% of Canadians named the US as the top threat to their country. And it's not just economics, though 77% see America as an economic threat. Over half, 53%, view the US as a national security threat. That means Canadians are more worried about America than China. What does all this mean for tourism? Well, when the country that makes up 25% of your entire international tourist economy hates you, that's bad for business. And it doesn't look like it's getting any better anytime soon. You know what else doesn't help? The US doing all it can to discourage international visitors. Tourism marketing efforts have been gutted. In July 2025, a new budget reconciliation bill came into effect in the US. Among its many provisions, it cut federal funding to the country's National Destination Marketing Organization, or DMO, called Brand USA, by 80%. Since the cuts came into force, the agency has laid off 15% of its staff. According to Peter Ricci, director of Florida Atlantic University's Hospitality and Tourism Program, these cuts are devastating for the future of tourism in the country. As he says, we are cutting at a time when we already need an increase in visitation. And Brand USA has been a huge success since its inception in 2010. It was created by Congress, via the Travel Promotion Act to encourage more international travelers to pick the U.S. as a destination. With a budget of around $184 million in its 2023 fiscal year, it generated around $5.9 billion in visitor spending. The agency more than pays for itself. It literally makes the country's citizens and government money. Taking some other overhead costs into account, this resulted in a $23.37 return on investment for every dollar spent. And that is just for 2024. Since 2012, America's tourism agency has pulled in an extra 10 million visitors, bringing $35 billion into the country. Most of that cash flowed straight into small businesses, boutique hotels, family-run restaurants, local tour groups, the kind of places that live or die on tourism dollars. The tourism spending as a result of these marketing efforts has also resulted in $10 billion in tax receipts, boosting government revenue as well. Unfortunately, taking away the organization's ability to market is going to cut into those profits. As Dulani Porter, an executive at Brand USA's creative agency Spark, says, rival destinations in Europe, Asia, and beyond are spending aggressively to attract the very travelers we would be ignoring. She compares the dialing back of funding for the agency as a unilateral disarmament in the global tourism competition. How much will cutting funding for Brand USA cost? It's too early to say, but similar cuts in the past on a smaller scale give us some idea of the impacts. In 1993, Colorado decided to defund its state tourism promotion budget. In 2 years, the state lost over $1.4 billion in revenue, its share of tourism within the U.S. dropping by 30%. After Colorado started marketing itself again, it still took years to get those tourists back and start growing its travel market again. And Brand USA also functions as an international platform for many of the smaller U.S. destinations and businesses that can't afford to advertise themselves. The U.S. Travel Association stated that defunding the agency will effectively end international travel promotion for regions that simply can't afford to reach global travelers on their own. Places like New York, Las Vegas, and Disney World can afford to market themselves. After all, Disney doesn't underpay its workers just to skip out on marketing budget. These destinations also have huge international name recognition, but they are facing other issues, as you'll see in our next point. But smaller mountain towns, lesser-known national parks, stops along scenic road trips in the countryside? Not so much. That's why experts warn the hardest hit will be rural and lesser-known destinations, the places without billion-dollar ad budgets. But there is one problem that drags down every U.S. destination: fees. Some are new, some are old, and all of them are irritating visitors to the U.S. As of October 1st, 2025, tourists need to pay a new $250 visa integrity fee. And unless you're from an ESTA country, that's before you even set foot in America. That fee means it will mostly apply to visitors from the Global South. That is on top of the $185 fee for a tourist visa that many travelers already needed to pay, raising the total cost for visiting the U.S., just the visa mind you, to $435 per person. To be fair, the fee will be refundable, but as of late August, it was still unclear just how that would work. In fact, even the timeline of when the fee will start was unclear for the longest time. The cost itself doesn't seem to be what's upsetting the people so much as the last-minute, ever-changing, opaque nature of tourist visa regulations. Future travelers don't know what to expect, and so to avoid any potential headaches, they just go elsewhere. The Congressional Budget Office insists the new fee is a win. With 11 million visa applicants a year, it projects $2.7 billion flowing straight to the State Department. But here is the problem. That fee is supposed to be refundable. So how exactly does the government plan to make billions from its money that it's giving back? No one seems to know. But even if the visa fees go to the government, tourism officials don't think that the fee will be a net positive. Tourism Economics estimated that it'll lead to a further drop of 5.4% in international visitors, around 1 million fewer visits per year. However, it's not only the new fee deterring tourists. Some people point out that tourism to the U.S. has become very aggravating for millions of tourists because of a million hidden costs that make everything too expensive. According to a tourism analytics article, a family of 4 can spend a week in Portugal, meals and lodging included, for less than a long weekend at Disney World. An analysis of Las Vegas hotels and resorts, on the other hand, America's addiction-filled playground, found that in 90 popular hotels, the average fee came out to $40.04 per night. Those fees often aren't disclosed when someone is booking. You just get the surprise bill at checkout after you've already lost all your money to blackjack and club drinks containing 0.5% of alcohol. Maybe that's the part of the reason why places with the most egregious hotel and resort fees are being hit the hardest. Orlando has experienced an 8% decline in foreign visitors just this year. Vegas hotel occupancy is down to 76.1% in July 2025. Just a year earlier, the hotels were 83.7% full. Hotels have lowered their rates to remain competitive, but it hasn't really worked. Fewer visits combined with lower prices have led to a 12.1% drop in revenue per available room. There are broader American fees that have been annoying international visitors forever and are getting more frustrating as time goes on. Tipping culture, for example, isn't a thing in most other countries. But even if it is, it's nowhere near what it's become in the US. Even some Americans are fed up with it. Go order a coffee at a counter, take a cab, even buy a book in some places, and you'll be presented with a screen asking for 20%, 25%, even 30% tip. The standard tipping practice in the US has been creeping up for years, to the point where 20% is now considered the minimum for most people. According to the Toast Company, which provides point-of-sale services for restaurants, the average nationwide tip at full-service restaurants was 19.1% in the first quarter of 2025. A generation ago, 10 to 15% was considered generous. At this rate, the next generation will be tipping half the price of their coffee, the one that they picked up themselves. According to Pew, 72% of U.S. adults say more places expect tips today than just 5 years ago. Even worse, in the birthplace of tipping culture, only a third of Americans say it's very easy to know when to tip, and just as many say it's easy to know how much. In other words, even Americans are lost. So imagine how confusing it is for foreigners landing in the middle of this mess. One survey found that half of international visitors feel their server or neighboring customers will judge them if they mess up tipping amounts. 55% of international visitors think that their local friends will judge them based on how much they tip. Basically, it creates a lot of anxiety and negativity around what should be the pretty fun experience of dining out. This doesn't even touch all the hidden costs that travelers are presented with, like surprise sales taxes added on to anything. Another thing most foreigners aren't used to. Most OECD countries are tax inclusive, meaning the price consumers see is the price they pay. The tax is already included. And just to make things messier, U.S. sales taxes change from state to state, sometimes even city to city. When international travelers experience much more expensive vacations in the U.S. because of all these hidden costs, or they hear about them from fellow travelers, it can decrease their willingness to travel to the country. But that is nothing compared to the outright fear some international visitors have been feeling lately, leading them to not become visitors at all. The U.S. has always had the power to deny entry to travelers. And in recent years, Customs and Border Protection can ask travelers to search their phones. And in 2025, things got worse. More and more travelers are being pulled aside, detained, or grilled, sometimes over minor offenses and sometimes just over language mix-ups. Instead of being deported back to their countries, several have been locked up for weeks. Sometimes they can't even access a lawyer or even easily communicate with relatives. This has led to several countries, including Denmark, Ireland, Germany, and Canada, updating their travel guidance for the U.S. The guidance makes it clear that even small violations of entry rules or communicating the wrong thing to a customs agent can risk detention. This is what happened to Lukas Ziloff, a German national engaged to a U.S. citizen. He was visiting his fiancée in Las Vegas on a 90-day tourist visa when they decided to take a quick road trip down to Mexico. On the way back to the U.S., the border agent asked where he was going and where he lived. Lukas, speaking English as his second language, answered Las Vegas and didn't understand the second part of the question. The border agent took this as confirmation that Ziloff was intending to stay in Las Vegas illegally and whisked him away. His fiancée tried to go with him to help them communicate, or at least get him a translator. Agents told her to be quiet and handcuffed her to a bench instead. Immigration lawyer Benjamin Osorio has seen this trend with many new clients. As he says, it's maximum enforcement these days, and lawyers are increasingly finding that border agents are less and less likely to even tell their detainees how long and why they're being held. Travelers on temporary visas, including tourists, have the fewest privacy rights. That means detentions and interrogations can happen anytime, often for reasons that feel random or inconsistent. And while these cases are still rare, plenty of people don't want to risk being the next headline, especially because stops and searches have already dramatically increased and are going to explode, according to immigration firm founder Richard Herman. In 2024, Customs and Border Patrol searched 47,000 electronic devices, a 10-fold increase compared to 2014. Zahra Bilou, an executive director of the Council on Islamic-American Relations, says, less than 0.01% of people are impacted by this, but one of its intentions is to cause everyone to be fearful. But maybe this tourism freefall could change in the near future. After all, the U.S. is one of 3 countries hosting the FIFA World Cup in 2026. Despite Americans themselves being lukewarm on the sport, football, remains by far the most popular sport in the world. It has 3.5 billion fans, almost half of the entire world's population. Millions of people flock to every World Cup. As of January 2025, FIFA expects over 5 million inbound visitors to the US, Canada, and Mexico, with the US hosting 60 of the 80 World Cup matches. A wave of tourists will inevitably land there. But the 2026 World Cup is just a short-term boost, a 39-day event. And that is only if it draws in as many visitors as expected. If global sentiment toward the US keeps sinking, those arrivals could shrink fast. What happens after? And none of this takes into account a huge factor in the decline of US tourism, and that is domestic tourism. The good news is that according to the US Travel Association, travel interest among Americans is still holding strong. 89% of American travelers have trips planned in the next 6 months, according to a March 2025 study in Longwoods. Travelers is defined as people who have taken trips in the last 3 years, and they plan to take a trip sometime in the next 2. But the organization is still pessimistic about how long the sustained interest in domestic tourism will last, because a lot of signs are troubling. To start with, 42% of all Americans expect travel to become more unaffordable next year. Research agency GSIQ, Global Sports Sponsorship and Tourism Intelligence, says American consumers are still traveling in 2025, but they're traveling differently. What does differently mean? Nothing good for the tourism economy. U.S. travelers are looking for shorter stays, budget travel, and great deals. In other words, they are not spending as much money. Experts have been calling this an increase in, quote, micro cautions. U.S. travelers are calling it, "We are broke." And that's because consumer confidence is in the toilet. It's been going down for years, and in 2025 it is hitting new lows. One survey found only 38% of Americans who don't think they're wealthy believe they will ever be. In 2023, that number was 41%, and in 2019 it was 51%. And wealthy doesn't mean mansions and Lamborghinis. For most people, 54%, it simply means living comfortably without money worries or just being debt-free, at 48%. According to the University of Michigan, consumer sentiment is at 58.2 in August 2025, compared to 67.9 in August 2024, which was a low mark to begin with after years of lockdowns and inflation. Continuously down is not the way we want consumer sentiment to go, generally. And when people don't feel secure in their finances or their future, optional luxury spending is the first thing to go, including vacations. That's a shame since domestic travelers accounted for 90% of all tourism revenue in 2024. In August 2025, the search for single-night stays made up 40% of all domestic travel searches, compared to 33% in January 2023. That's coupled with a 3-year high in searches for 3-night or less stays. Basically, weekend getaways, if that. Another measure that experts look to gauge travelers' apprehension as consumers is the length of booking windows. And there is a clear, negative trend emerging there. Travelers are booking closer to their arrival dates, both to take advantage of last-minute deals and because they are not confident enough in the stability of their finances to make longer-term plans. In early 2023, 46% of searches were made within 28 days of a possible vacation. In August 2025, 57% of all searches were made in that same time period, less than a month from a potential trip. Not to mention that domestic travel, like everything else in the world, is becoming increasingly politicized. Compared to November 2024, the number of travelers avoiding specific cities or states went from 12% to 20%. Those who said politics didn't affect their travel decisions within the country dropped from 60% to 46%, meaning more than half of Americans are traveling at least in part politically and avoiding specific destinations in the U.S. based on that. Add to that a new $50 billion travel trade deficit for the U.S., meaning the U.S. is sending way more travelers abroad than it's receiving, and it seems almost impossible that tourism in the U.S. will improve in the near future. Tourism in the U.S. might be struggling, but around the world, visitors have caused some damage. Watch even more expensive things destroyed by tourists to see the costly mistakes, or click on this video instead.